So hello, everybody, and welcome to our session. I am Merrilee Proffitt. I am a member of the steering committee of the Wikimedia and Libraries user group, and I am here today to welcome you to our track in WikiCite, Advancing Librarianship and Scholarly Communication. We've got a great lineup for you today. But first of all, I just wanted to welcome you, to thank you for attending today, and also to give you just a very short introduction and orientation to the Wikimedia and Libraries user group, and to invite you warmly to join us in our activities. And I'm just going to step through just a few slides and then answer any questions that you have, and also invite my colleague Simon Cobb, who's also on the Wikimedia and Libraries group, to add some additional commentary. So what does our user group do? We've been around, I think, for about 3 years now. We are, as an affiliate, we are a thematic user group. So we are globally oriented and focus on that intersection, that special intersection of Wikimedia projects and libraries and librarianship. So we're really here to offer guidance and encouragement for Wikimedians who want to engage with libraries and librarians, and also for libraries and librarians who want to engage with Wikimedia projects. As you probably know, there are many entry points into the Wikimedia universe, and we are just here to listen to what people's particular interests are and to encourage them in the right direction, to give exemplars of really great projects going on, and to just be kind of like a place to listen for emerging projects and to give encouragement. We're also a venue for the exchange of ideas around collaborations and opportunities for Wikimedia and libraries. We're certainly not the only place that this happens. Of course, very many regional chapters also foster this type of activity. The Wikidata community is very welcoming to libraries. We've certainly seen a lot of activity with libraries and Wikipedia, but we just really see ourselves as kind of like a switchboard for those things. We're not claiming any sort of ownership over this space. We're just see ourselves as a place that people can come as a starting point and then launch themselves into whatever the right direction is. And then finally, we really look to provide representation. So we strive to show up at Wikimedia conferences like this one, and also encourage the submission of sessions on Wikimedia projects at library conferences. So again, kind of providing that dual role. Very many people on our steering committee are Wikibrarians, people who are kind of at that intersection naturally of Wikimedia projects, and also libraries. So we just want to be able to kind of show up in both of our universes, both in the Wikimedia spaces and in library spaces. There's a bunch of places that you can find us. Of course, we have a space on Meta, and you can sign up and join us by in the usual manner. You can also, we have a Facebook group that we help to manage, the Wikimedia and Libraries user group on Facebook, and we have pretty lively discussions there as well. And then we also have a Wikimedia mailing list. So those are kind of the three places that you can join us. We also have a Twitter account, and I will add that to the slides retrospectively, so that you can have a link to that as well. So we hope that you follow us on Twitter as well. So our steering committee is global. I'm on the west coast of the United States, and then we go all the way to Australia. So this makes our steering committee meetings somewhat of a challenge, but we all pitch in and make it work. But one of the really great things about our group, and one of the things that I love and value, is that truly global quality, and the fact that everybody works together and is passionate about the same things. And you'll hear from some other steering committee members during the session today. So switching to today's session, we are going to be taking a look at Project VandyCite, which is a project related to scholarly communications efforts, and looking at how a campus can support research information management and the promulgation of scholarly outputs at Vanderbilt University in the US. We're taking a look at metadata from the National Library of Israel, good citizenship and bad metadata. What a title. I'm very excited that we're going to be welcoming Alice Kibombo, who is the Wikimedia excited to hear about her project. And finally, we'll be hearing about Scholia from one of my fellow steering committee members, Houcemeddine Turki from Tunisia. So that is kind of an overview of today's session. For those of you who have been attending WikiCite sessions, we invite you to please help us take notes, and hopefully I haven't actually dropped out. Let's see, am I still, looks like I'm still streaming. And we encourage you to ask questions in Telegram or on the Etherpad. And I understand that also people can put questions into YouTube, and we can see those as well. But either of those three ways of asking questions is just great. So Telegram, you can put things on the Etherpad if you don't want to get signed up for Telegram or find that to be a barrier to participation, or on the YouTube channel. So any of those things would be great. We have ample time for questions. So I'm going to come back over here and switch off the slides. And I'm going to invite Simon to come into the stream with me. Hello, Simon.
Hi, Merrilee. Hi, everyone. Hi. So thanks for that introduction to the session. There's a lot to look forward to this afternoon, or this morning, respectively, wherever anyone is in the world. Afternoon for me, but obviously there's
early
people
morning
all over.
for me. Yeah.
I think this is also a good opportunity to start a conversation about the user group and what we're doing, what people might want us to focus on over the next year, because I know that's come up a few times in our meetings, and we've been talking about it again recently about trying to get some input from the group about the sort of activities and sort of focuses that we should have. I think this is a great opportunity to start that conversation. So if people have thoughts or ideas, please just deposit them in the Etherpad or send us messages through YouTube or Telegram so we can get that dialogue going. Even if we don't have the full conversation today, at least just get some ideas and then we can come back to them at a later date.
Yeah, just scanning right now. Telegram for questions. There was a Wiki Library seems to be a general group. It's a very general group. I would say that our activities are pretty wide and broad. We don't have one of the advantages of our group, I think, is that we do kind of take that broad focus, but one of the disadvantages of our group is that we're not very narrowly focused because, of course, librarianship takes many different forms. You have people who are working in special collections who may be interested in digitization or discovery of special resources, and they may be interested in putting resources on Wikimedia Commons, describing those resources in Wikidata, making sure that those resources are described on Wikipedia. You may have metadata librarians who are very, very interested in Wikidata and the future of Wikibase as a platform. You may have scholarly communication librarians who you'll be hearing from next, who are really interested in what they can do to support research and the promulgation of research in a campus environment. You may have public librarians who are interested in supporting information literacy and how editing Wikipedia can be a tool to support that. We've seen a lot of very varied interest within libraries. So I would, if I had one piece of advice for Wikimedians, it's to listen to your librarians and to know what their goals and missions are, and then think about what projects are ongoing that match those interests and those needs, rather than pre-assuming. Advice for librarians would be similar to listen to what Wikimedians are working on and not just assume that everybody's laboring away on Wikipedia. But if you're here, you probably already know that. So
you mentioned content donations to Commons there, and I think over the next year there's going to be some really interesting opportunities for working with structured data on Commons, rather than having to do some work in Wikidata and after you upload your images to Commons, being able to do it all in Commons is potentially very powerful for tagging library collections and being able to query them all in that one place. I think that's an area where we could focus on and perhaps see if we can find some early adopters to put some collections in and see what we can do with them. Of course, documentation is valuable, so if we did that, we could maybe write a guide of how others can replicate that. I think that's something we get a lot of requests for, and that's documentation, how people should be doing things. So, as a community, I think we struggle a bit there. I know personally, I really enjoy doing things. I don't really like stopping doing to document them. So.
I don't think you are alone. Let's see. There is a question on the Etherpad, so I'm running to the Etherpad to see what that question is.
See, we've got one about narrative locations, but I know I've looked at narrative location in Wikidata when I've been doing book imports, bibliographic metadata imports for a collection of books. It's really quite a difficult property to use unless it's explicitly stated somewhere in the metadata you're working with. Otherwise, you're going to have familiarity with the text to be able to use that property. It's not something that you can just infer from the subject that the narrative location is going to be a particular place. It's a similar property to sort of talking about the characters in a work as well. It's perhaps going one level further than just a data import. It's doing some further curation. Very valuable if you can do it, but quite time consuming, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I've answered that question particularly, but it's just thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that representing things like, that's the kind of thing that I think would be represented in a subject heading, and those types of things aren't even really necessarily handled well or consistently within bibliographic cataloging. So transferring that, thinking thoughtfully about how to represent that in, I would think that looking to library models and how those are represented in library models may be a good place to start, and then think about transferring over. Certainly with since you're working on identifier models, you're going to have, rather than strings, you're going to have less of a chance for misspelling or misrepresenting a place, the setting for a novel. For example, you can more specifically say this novel is set in this place, and then be able to link to the Wikidata property, which is for that place, which is already set up, which is marvelous. A little more challenging, I suppose, if you have truly fictional locations. You've got to set those up yourself. Let's see.
So interested in the comment from Gavin Wilshaw, saying the University of Edinburgh would be interested in experimenting with structured data on commons. I know there's a Wikimedian in residence you and through at Edinburgh, so it might be quite easy to facilitate a project around that if there's interest. Certainly interested in advising or following that project. I'm happy to help if I can.
Very good. You've got an instant response right there.
I think it's quite an attractive new development on Commons for any sort of content, really, not just images. But yeah, it's very new, so don't know exactly what we can really do with it, and obviously still in development as well. But having early adopters could even inform the development at the moment. So there are a lot of opportunities, and I hope we can be involved in that. Just have a look on the Etherpad again. There are some other comments coming in.
I know you can watch them in real time being typed.
I know. It's quite tantalizing, isn't it? Waiting for the end of a sentence.
Right. Wait for the, well, at least it's you don't have to, it's not German, and you don't have to wait for the end of the sentence to see what the verb is.
So the question about showcases where libraries use Wikidata to better display maps of keywords, I'm wondering whether we can use lexemes for that at all. It's not really an area that I've been that active in, but there are others on the call who might be able to comment on that. So lexemes kind of seem like they'd be ideal for doing maps of keywords. Just throwing that out there. I could be completely wrong, and do tell me if I am, but if there's anything in that to work with, then let's see. What else have we got? Who outside Wikidata has data on narrative locations, eras, etc.? Does OCLC have anything like that, Merrilee?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of that embedded in. So, WorldCat is huge. There's, if you're looking for a specific type of metadata, we probably have it. I think that we have an experimental service called Fiction Finder, which was developed to, it's one of our Ferber-based experiments within OCLC research. And if you look at Fiction Finder specifically, I think that service has a place to to search by or to cluster things by setting or place. I'll go after the session. I'll go look at that and add that to the Etherpad because I'm not very good at managing this many tabs all at once. But I think if you have a look at Fiction Finder, you can see that kind of exemplified, and it's basically pulling that data out of wherever it lives in the MARC record and kind of showcasing it. So, I mean, I think that there's MARC-based examples of that. In terms of Wikidata-based examples, I'm really not sure who's doing that. Is that anything that you've looked at in your work with the National Library of Wales, kind of looking at settings in particular for books? Or
no, it's I only worked with what was already in the metadata, and then mainly focusing on author disambiguation, which is just massively time consuming. So no, I didn't get onto that. But maybe look in Scholia, because I know the sort of visualizations of topics you can do in there. That might be a starting point for finding some data in Wikidata.
Yeah.
I
think,
my goodness.
All of these mentions of drinking in the comments is far too early here. I've got coffee. That's about it. But
I think it's about time for our next presentation, isn't it?
It is. We're
chatting away here, but
yeah, we'll just pull ourselves out of the stream and bring up our next speakers. So thank you guys so much for making us feel welcome here today, and we'll switch over to our next speakers. Thanks so much. Oops. Let's see.
Morning, Merrilee.
Out of the stream. Hello. Let's see. So do you guys have your presentation?
I do. So shall I start sharing this now? Okay.
Yeah, that would be great. And then I will add it to the stream.
Okay.
And I'll pull myself out.
Here we go. Let's see if this works. Can you see that well? Okay, good. All right. Good morning, everybody. Really nice to be with you. This is exciting to be part of this event, and obviously a global event. And we're thrilled to be speaking from Nashville at an early morning hour, but a decent breakfast time. Not too bad. Okay. So today our topic is Project VandyCite, and we're going to be discussing this initiative that we took at Vanderbilt University during the past year. And let me just begin by an introduction to myself and to Vanderbilt University. So Vanderbilt University is a research university located in Nashville, Tennessee. It was founded in 1873. And it has an undergraduate enrollment of 7,000 students roughly, and a graduate enrollment of about 6,500, so about 13,500 students altogether. And I am a librarian at Vanderbilt. My title is Associate University Librarian for Research and Digital Strategy, which means I get involved in a lot of digital things, as you can imagine. I'm also a member, with Merrilee and others in this group, of the Wikimedia and Library Steering Committee, so very much trying to bridge the community of Wikimedians and librarians, and also active in other projects like 1,000 Women in Religion. So that's my own background coming into this. But let me just begin by talking a little bit about the project. Okay, go. So first, let me just mention a few things about scholarly communications, because this term may not be familiar to everyone that's listening in. It's very familiar to academics, I think. But scholarly communications is a broad topic that deals with the entire research and publication value chain. So scholarly communications thinks about really publishing as an ecosystem from end to end. And we think that Wikidata can serve as a central hub in that scholarly communications value chain by, just as it's been so good at doing, connecting these sort of disparate islands of information and bringing them together. So I'm thinking about places that identify who people are, like VIAF, connecting with institutions, identifying where those institutions are located and what kind of institutions they are that support publishing activities. Obviously, thinking about authors and their publications, their bibliography, other types of production, the editors that are working in journals, and so who are those editors? What are the journals? And also the citation networks that emerge when you start looking at how all of these groups connect together. So that's of critical interest to people that are doing scholarly communications and looking at how information and publications pass through that value chain. And I would also say that scholarly communications is not simply an analytical activity, to quote someone who's fairly well known, or to riff on it at least. Scholarly communications is not about just interpreting the world in various ways, but the point is to change that world. So scholarly communications is also about advocacy. We're trying to make this publication ecosystem more efficient and to reduce the barriers to access so that people can actually read the research outputs that universities like Vanderbilt and universities around the world are producing. So that leads us into this question about the metadata side of things. We have been working for a long time at Vanderbilt, and Steve has been part with me in a long effort to really introduce concepts about linked data to our librarians. This has been something we've had an active linked data working group for years, really. And I would say, and Steve can comment if you like, Steve, that it was a bit tough going. We focused on some of the standards that are out there. We certainly did SCOS, and we looked at RDF and the ways that you can serialize RDF. We used tools like BlazeGraph. We explored AWS Titan, which is their graph database. I did a lot of work in just graph databases myself, and we tried to show our librarians how this could affect their work in the areas of bibliography by, again, by connecting things like DOIs and ISSNs and ISBNs, Library of Congress IDs, BIF, ORCID IDs, and bringing together all those different sources of information that they work with on a daily basis, but they don't necessarily see as linked data in the systems that they're using. So I would say it was a bit tough going.
High barrier to entry.
High barrier to entry. Thank you, Steve. And so Wikidata has dramatically lowered that barrier to entry, and I think that's one of the greatest successes that I see, even for the linked data community, that it's just provided a great entry point for people to get into using linked data in a very accessible way. I'll come back to them in a moment, though, because what we're talking about today is how we got those librarians involved in this particular project I call VandyCite. So VandyCite came out of, like everyone else, we had to make this crazy quick transition back in mid-March to remote work. I mean, we all know exactly what happened, with COVID. So we as library administrators, I mean, that's my role to help people to manage their projects across a number of areas, had to think about how to keep people productively engaged with their work as we move to remote work. And that was particularly difficult, I think, when you're thinking about people whose work was actually tied to the facility in some way. They might have been standing at a reference desk or a circulation desk, or they might be involved in the delivery or sort of circulation of print materials. And a number of those activities were shut down. And so we needed to make sure that we could keep people productively employed during especially that early period of remote work. So we decided to take this kind of approach of organizing teams. Normally libraries are organized in departments, and it's fairly hierarchical, but we thought, given that we've got people working in different units that have different needs, let's form teams around sort of particular goals, and then we can meet those goals by pretty intensive work as we move to remote work. And so we organize teams around things like digital preservation, web accessibility, asynchronous learning, digital pedagogy, and so on and so on. This could be a separate talk just for librarians about the management style of moving from a kind of hierarchical mode to a team mode. Nevertheless, one of those teams was a Wikidata team. Now these teams required 20 hours of work at a minimum. Some people did more. They were, as I say, cross-departmental, non-hierarchical, And our particular team for Wikidata included people. There was a cataloger. There was someone who had worked or was working in our annex library, a copyright clearance coordinator, 2 staff members from our divinity library, and others, including Steve and me. And so, it's a very sort of mixed group of skills. And at the beginning, I was put in as since I formed the team, I was the nominal head. But what was really great about this was that that only lasted for a little while, and then others quickly took over and led the way, which I think was fantastic because that's exactly what we wanted. My main role became actually record keeping, which is another thing which Wikidata really helped with. When we tried to show, okay, how are we, are people engaged? Are they making contributions? There's no easier way than just using the statistics that you can get from Wikimedia to demonstrate that. Okay, so when we began these teams, we had to train almost everybody because they hadn't used Wikidata before, to use Wikidata and to engage in the goals of WikiCite. And so we had to introduce those communities and to talk about how to get involved in it. So one thing that we wanted to avoid was a kind of, and I don't want to impugn any prior efforts really, but there had been an effort called Slam the Boards, which was something that was done, I would say in the mid 2000s or maybe a little bit later. And the goal was to kind of engage on a periodic basis with reference boards to show the value of librarians. And I think for that goal, it was a fine movement. But what we wanted to do here was, rather than sort of make a periodic engagement, we wanted our librarians to engage with the Wikimedia community and really learn from them as well as learn from us, and to understand themselves as part of that community. So one thing that we asked everyone to do was to write a conflict of interest statement before they began editing. We looked and researched, we didn't find a formal conflict of interest statement in Wikidata, but we made sure that everyone understood that when you're editing on Wikidata, you're editing for the greater good of Wikidata. And we thought that this aligned well with making sure that what we were editing, putting in articles about our faculty's bibliography, did serve the ends of WikiCite. But we wanted to make sure that that they were aware that there could potentially be a conflict of interest. And then I led several training sessions just on basic entry, how to create an item, how to add new properties, how to do references. Then the librarians started teaching each other as they had questions. I'll come back to that in a second. And then what they also got, we also said plug into the WikiCite community or sign up for Wiki Project books and learn about the models that are being used there. And lo and behold, they're using a Ferber model, which is a natural paradigm for librarians, simplified just to use work in addition rather than manifestation item. And so I think people that had worked in cataloging thought this is great. Now I can also apply Ferber, which is something that I wanted to do. So we did develop communication channels for our librarians to talk with each other about the issues that they were encountering. As I say, we started just with gathering the group, and at first the communication I thought maybe it should take place like on Wiki, and so I set up just a single page connected with my user page for training resources and put a lot of lists about what people should read there. But then we started a team channel that was internal. And I think people felt most comfortable there, which is why I've highlighted this here, communicating on Teams, which if you haven't used it, is like a Slack-like environment. Just because I think as they were starting, they would raise questions and then other people would come in and I think they felt a little bit more comfortable there. But as we moved on and people grew and grew in their level of comfort in Wikidata itself, we also started a formal page called Project VandyCite, and maybe Steve can put this into the notes.
Yeah, it's in there.
Okay, thanks. Where we primarily use that to visualize our progress with things like listeria and integrality, I think is what it's called, to show basically, the progress over time of our efforts. And so that's helpful, and I think it's also helpful for others keeping tabs on what we're about. Okay. So one of the things that we were able to achieve in this project was we were able to make some links, not only in the way that we've been talking about, or I've been talking about up to now, between different information silos, say in cyberspace, but we also made links between different information silos that are part of our own library system. So as some of you know, academic libraries at research universities are also quite diverse. We have 9 divisional libraries, and liaisons in those libraries had been keeping their own bibliographies of faculty members' publications. Sometimes those bibliographies were kept in Zotero, sometimes they were in spreadsheets, sometimes they were being imported into institutional repositories like DSpace or bpress. We actually have both, don't ask me why, at Vanderbilt. And so there was no single bibliography for faculty publications on campus, meaning that we were, in effect, when we tried to look at what our faculty was producing, we were forced to go to third parties to actually collate that data for us and then present it back to us. And so we were also missing research outputs because even the people that were keeping those data in their individual libraries weren't necessarily looking at like new forms of scholarly communications like clinical trials or publications of data sets that had DOIs. And so it helped us in thinking about the scope of what we're doing and what we wanted to put on Wikidata to start taking all those different information sources and bringing them together just as a library internally. Another place that I think that, I mentioned there could be potential for conflict of interest, but it was an interesting discussion that we had, and I'd love for feedback from the community here, is thinking about notability. Now, in some ways, this is a much less fraught issue than it is on like English language Wikipedia. And our view was that as long as you could find a relevant identifier for an article that established its, that it's a scholarly article, that it would belong within the purview of WikiCite. We started branching out though from just scholarly articles to things like digital repositories. So we have an initiative called the Slave Society Digital Archive that collects sort of rare materials about the migrations of forced migrations of African peoples around the world. And it's a very important archive, and now we have an entry for it. And so, again, like we feel that's notable and that belongs under the category of digital archives. There are, though, in some faculty bibliographies, things that we eventually thought probably don't belong. And this is where it got a little bit more sensitive. Some faculty would list blog posts and maybe non-peer-reviewed posters. And after some conversation, we thought unless there was a peer review of that blog post and it was in some sense seen more like a publication, it wouldn't be included. And we never had any faculty challenges on that. I'm not sure, and frankly, that everybody's fully aware, although we did publicize our efforts, and that's one thing I should mention. We did a nice press release there. At least everyone on campus would know what was going on, which we can also put in the notes. But, again, we wanted to make sure that we're serving the good of the Wikidata, WikiCite community, and so there were some things that did fall below the threshold that we cut off and didn't include. Okay, I think Steve, I'm done with my initial part, so let's bring that over to you.
Okay, thanks, Cliff. So as Cliff mentioned, I've been interested in linked data for a long time, and I got quite interested in Wikidata because it's such a practical application of that. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about Vanderbilt, which is a project I've been working on for about a year now. And I thought I would define sort of what a bot is and what I mean when I call Vanderbilt a bot. I'm just going to say it's things that can read and write to Wikidata via its API. And some of the bots that are out there are operating without human intervention, but Vanderbilt is not an autonomous bot. It is a bot that works together with humans. Next slide. So just to sort of contrast, a lot of people are familiar with quick statements, and there's kind of a one-way loop where the person looks at what's in Wikidata, edits a CSV or some other form of interface, and then uses the web interface to push that data into Wikidata. Next slide. The Vanderbilt is really kind of a team approach. So Vanderbilt, which is a series of Python scripts, sort of sits in the middle. It can both read and write to Wikidata, and it uses spreadsheets as a local storage mechanism. but it's also tied into other data sources. It has uses an API to look up things in ORCID, in PubMed, in Crossref, and it has uses fuzzy matching to make disambiguation decisions, but then it also can call in the human if it can't decide what to do. Next slide. So basically, it's a team effort where the bot looks things up for the human and then disambiguates where it can and tries to avoid duplicating existing information. But again, it has human assistance. The other thing that I tried really to do is to identify when references were missing and make it possible to add references to existing statements. So I just made kind of a back of the envelope calculation that I could make probably 40 edits per hour working by myself. But with Vanderbot, I can edit about 200 items per hour on average, and that's items, not edits. So each of those items might actually involve a number of edits. So using Vanderbot as a tool, I could work probably 10 times or more faster than I could work by myself. Next slide. So prior to the start of the VandyCite project, I used Vanderbot to make over 8,000 item edits, and most of those edits involve multiple statements being edited at once. And the end result was that basically all Vanderbilt faculty and many of the postdocs and other staff had records, fairly complete records in terms of, well, not records, but items for all of them with at least minimal information. And this allowed then linking those people to other resources. I created almost 1,000 links between researchers and clinical trials using the new principal investigator property. And then this also was ready to go when VandyCite started. So there are now about 22,000 works that are linked to Vanderbilt researchers. Vanderbot did not make those links, but the fact that the researchers were there made it possible for either humans to do that or other connections that had been made previously are now associated with Vanderbilt because the people are associated with Vanderbilt. Next slide. So I'm going to not try to get in the weeds too much on how Vanderbot works. Next slide. But basically, as I said, it's a series of several scripts. The key script is the last one. That's the one, it's a general purpose script that ingests CSV and writes data to the Wikidata API. But that script gets fed by a series of other scripts. For the project involving getting people, the Vanderbilt researchers, these scripts were pretty idiosyncratic because I had to scrape web pages, and so essentially I wrote a different routine for every web page. And then that information from the web page had to be disambiguated using fuzzy matching. And then I also downloaded the existing statements using the Wikidata query interface. And so the key thing here was to try to not duplicate existing records, but to identify when they were already there and only add new information. Next slide. So just, I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but there's sort of a loop that involves getting the information from the BlazeGraph interface or the Wikidata query service, and then through either pulling data from other places or having it manually added by humans, that information ended up in the CSV spreadsheet. And because it's a spreadsheet's easily editable, the human part of the team could go in and make corrections and look for errors prior to actually writing it to the API. And then when everything's ready to go, there's a mapping schema that Vanderbot uses that translates the format of the spreadsheet into the form that the API needs in order to ingest the data. So what a critical piece of this also is once the data is written to the API to grab the identifiers of the newly created items. And that's important because there's actually a lag between when the data is put in the API and when it's available in the query service. So you can't depend on finding out about things that were written immediately because sometimes there could be a lag of up to several hours before that information is available. Next slide. So at this point, I'm working with Charlotte Liu and Chris Benda in the Divinity School, and we're working on trying to create journal items for all of the journals that people regularly publish there. And as a part of this process, I'm trying to generalize these sort of preliminary scripts where you acquire the data so that they're not focused entirely on people, but really on any kind of thing like journals or artwork or whatever. I also have been working with my collaborator, Jesse Baskuf, who is helping me, or helped develop a web interface to create the schema that does the mapping between the CSV files and the Wikibase data model. And we have a manuscript we're hoping to submit by December on this. And in the end, as Cliff mentioned, there's one of these Zotero databases that is like offline. And eventually we want to take the publications that are in there, connect them with the journal items we're creating and with the divinity faculty that are already in Wikidata to sort of create a graph of these publications. And these are typically works that aren't available in commercial databases. So like for fields like biomedical fields, that kind of information is readily available, but this is we're excited about this because this would increase the exposure of the work of people in departments that aren't covered as well in those databases. Next slide. So you may be wondering why I'm developing this code and not just using existing code. So I want to talk a little bit about sort of the future uses I see for this. Next slide. So I mentioned that identifiers are really important. And in the spreadsheets, the identifiers basically are how Vanderbilt keeps track of whether the data already exists or if it doesn't yet exist and is needs to be written. But the other piece of keeping track of these identifiers is it uniquely identifies all the bits that are in Wikidata. And so you can check against the records in the spreadsheet. You can check the records in the spreadsheet against what's in Wikidata using the query service. And this gives a possible mechanism for tracking vandalism, which I'll talk about in just a moment. Next slide. So I mentioned that there was this mapping schema, and it's actually a W3C recommendation that maps table columns to any RDF model. And so the schema that I use maps it to the Wikidata model. And so, as I mentioned, these schemas are used by Vanderbilt so that it knows how to connect the columns of the spreadsheet to the Wikibase model. So that's just kind of a technical thing. But the thing I'm really excited about is that you can also use these schemas to emit exactly the same RDF that you would get if you queried the query service. And so essentially this allows us to create an unambiguous, stable, standardized way to archive snapshots of what is in Wikidata in an easy to read tabular form. Next slide. So at WikiCon North America, we gave a talk, and this is a slide I showed. At that point, I was thinking of Wikibase as a possible way to keep sort of like a local copy of Wikidata. Next slide. But I sort of gave up on that when I realized that if you archive these spreadsheets in GitHub, you could use basically the built-in versioning of GitHub combined with the ability to emit triples from those spreadsheets. And there's a Ruby script called Tabulator that will do this. And so you can basically take these snapshots, put them in a triple store as separate named graphs, and then it would be potentially possible to have another script that would query the triple store, query the live Wikidata query service, and look for differences between the two. Next slide. And so this basically gives us ability to do things that other tools like quick statements, open, refine, and so on cannot do. The ability to keep snapshots of the part of Wikidata that we're interested in, I think is really powerful. And being able to then use this information to both detect changes that other people have made to the topics of our interest, but also to potentially detect and possibly revert vandalism I think this is a future capability of the system that I'm really excited about being able to explore in the future. And I think that's my last slide.
Great, thanks, Steve. And I know our time is coming to an end, so I just want to quickly say a few things about future steps that we'd like to take. So Steve mentioned some of the things that you know, it's fantastic, the work, as you can imagine. I'm so glad that he's a collaborator on this project. But we're also thinking about some other types of integrations into our systems. One is we'd like to connect what we're doing with Project VandyCite more closely with our institutional repository. For those of you that aren't familiar with that term, the idea of an institutional repository is that it provides open access to faculty, staff, and faculty and staff publications and preprints. And so there's already a property that we can use, full work available at, it's P953. We've put that on a few of our items that we've entered, but I'd like to have that on every item, because that would help us to map, okay, what's available from our faculty in open access in our repository versus what's not yet available in that form. And then that helps us, as I mentioned, as scholarly communications librarians, to engage in conversations about getting more items into our repository in open access. We're also, actively involved working with other people at the university and thinking about research information management. There are systems out there, as I alluded to, that will essentially sell your data back to you. You produce all this information, and then they collate it and they provide it in a nice form. But we think that it's eventually will be possible through Wikidata to build tools that will rise to the level and maybe be even more complete. For example, a lot of these systems miss items in the humanities where they're very good in the sciences. And so because we don't have any bias towards one discipline or another, we've got people working across these fields and very well aware of the publications in their respective areas. We think we may be more comprehensive, and a tool like Scholia, suitably developed, I think will become soon a very strong competitor in this research information management area. I'm sure we'll hear more about that. And finally, just to mention a grant that we are very happy to have received from WikiCite. Is to develop learning pathways. What we're going to do with this grant is to develop an interactive experience for librarians who, very similar to our own librarians, come into WikiCite, Wikidata for the first time and need to find their pathway. The idea is you might come in as a cataloger, so there's a lot of things that you know already about Ferber, for example, that you don't need explained to you. Whereas if you come in from the circulation desk, that might be less familiar to you, so you might need to learn some of the ideas behind Ferber so that you can actively engage in understanding what the difference is between a work and edition, so on and so forth. So we're excited about that. We're going to try to use everything that we've learned, that we've sort of been rushing through and talking about, to put into this learning pathways exercise and release to the community back or this coming spring. And with that, I will stop sharing because I think we're at the end of our time. Thank you so much. Hi, Simon.
Hi, thanks. That was a great talk. We do have some questions for you in the Etherpad, but we are right on the time limit. So I don't know whether you'd be able to cast your eye over them and put some answers into the Etherpad.
Yeah, so we can certainly engage in the Etherpad, and I apologize for talking right to the limit.
No, that's absolutely fine. It was a great presentation. Really enjoyed it. But we'll stay on track. So we'd be grateful if you could answer the questions that have been put to you, because there are a few humdingers in there. So thank you.
Thanks.
So we can bring in Ava now. Hey, nice to see you.
Nice to see you again.
Yeah. So do you have any slides that you...
Yeah. Let me share the screen.
So I'm looking forward to your presentation. It's about a year since we were talking at WikiDataCon about some of the work you were doing in the National Library of Israel, and been following it since. It seems like you've been making good progress. So look forward to hearing about it.
Thank God. Okay, you're seeing my slides, right? Because it's taking over my whole screen.
And I'm going to remove myself and leave the floor to you.
Okay, thank you. Hi, I'm Ahava Cohen. I'm the head of Hebrew cataloging at the National Library of Israel, and I teach cataloging and classification at David Jolien College MLIS program. I'm also the backup representative from Europe to the RDA Steering Committee with areas of interest in multilingualism and internationalization of metadata. So it's obvious why, when National Library of Israel started to think about Wikidata projects, they turned to me and asked me to head up the project. Our road to multiple Wikidata projects has been a long and complicated journey. The National Library of Israel has been involved with Wikipedia for quite a while. We've been running monthly editathons for almost 10 years. But thanks to a $54,000 grant, National Library of Israel declared 2020 would be our year of Wiki at the library. We got off to a running start, uploading photos from the Dan Hadani collection to WikiCommons, releasing one of our reference librarians to serve as a half-time Wikipedian in residence, running Wikipedia training for public school and academic librarians. Of course, this was before all the shutdowns, and opening up an Israeli Wiki Libraries Facebook group. Our crowning achievement for 2020 was coming in as the top country in the world in the One Lib, One Ref campaign. While we had all this experience with Wikipedia, we were just beginning to understand the power of Wikidata. Looking back, I wonder if it took us so long because our Wikipedia work was the province of the reference librarians, and they were already used to packaging information for ease of use by patrons. Our Wikidata projects began when we brought on board a cataloger who felt far more comfortable with creating discrete bits of metadata than with writing whole sentences inside Hebrew Wikipedia. Our first big Wikidata project stemmed from a local problem. We switched from Aleph to Alma as our integrated library system, and that meant that the multiple authority databases which we had managed had to either be combined, moved to an external system, or discarded altogether. The Israeli Publishers Database had been built up over the course of several years by our legal deposit staff, and it included information about publishers, their contact information, their history, and rights management. After a reorganization of the department in 2016, the database was no longer in use and it was no longer maintained. But when we discussed shutting it down and erasing the metadata as part of our move to Alma, we found out that there were researchers who had been using that information and they protested the closure. After we looked into alternatives, we realized that the information we had could be of use to Wikidata. We had high quality authoritative information about over 1,700 Israeli publishers. Most of them were not yet represented in Wikidata. Any attempt in the future to make a large-scale Wikidata project for Hebrew bibliography would require the information that we were in danger of erasing. So we had to be good citizens, step up to the plate, and donate our information. And so the Wikidata Israeli Publishers Database Project at the National Library of Israel was born. As I said, our database was built for internal use. Since we used Ex Libris's Aleph for our acquisitions work, the information was stored as MARC data, but nearly every field was localized. Even if we had found the perfect crosswalk from MARC authority data to Wikidata, it wouldn't have been of any help in this database. It's not that the metadata was bad, per se. It was perfect for its intended use. The problem is that our Wikidata project wanted to make the metadata that had been gathered serve a different purpose. And to do that, we needed to get the information, both what was encoded and what was stored as narrative, into a standardized format. Even little things like consistency in the metadata was lacking. Sometimes an address would have P.O. box. Sometimes it would be P.O. box. Sometimes P.O. box. Sometimes the area codes came before the phone number, sometimes after the phone number, sometimes there weren't even area codes at all. It all had to be cleaned up before we felt comfortable uploading the metadata to Wikidata. Another issue was, since this was an internal database, public and private information was all mixed in together. Before we could upload any of the information we had, in keeping with National Library policy, we had to make sure we cleaned the database of people's personal addresses and telephone numbers, leaving only the corporate information to be shared with the world. Before we closed down Olive, we saved the database as an Excel file and began to normalize the metadata. Now, those of you who've done batch uploads to Wikidata are probably groaning here. Why did we use Excel? It's a good question. The answer, of course, is that we just didn't know any better. But we did try to learn. We started to teach ourselves Open Refine. Of course, that right away limited our options because the people doing the learning had to be able to follow tutorials that were out there, and those were mainly in English. So we started out the project with 3 strikes against us. The people working on the projects had to understand how the database was constructed. They had to understand how to map the database to Wikidata. And if we wanted them to work in Open Refine, they had to be able to understand the tutorials. We were lucky to get a grant from Wikimedia Israel to attend WikiDataCon 2019, where Simon gave me an amazing workshop on Open Refine. We learned the basics of Open Refine, but left Berlin with a lot of questions about working with multilingual information. And that's a crucial area for us because we work in 4 languages of cataloging: Hebrew, English, Arabic, and Russian. Another area in which we had problems was group work. And here I'm going to make myself sound a little bit dim. Because of all the languages, we had to pass the project from department to department. The same people who know Russian don't necessarily know Arabic. We didn't realize that if we passed the projects back and forth within Open Refine, we could export it and import it as an Open Refine project. So we kept taking it over to Excel, having to rejig some of the metadata, bringing it back into Open Refine, and we made a huge mess, but we've learned better now. Another problem was that some of the publishers already exist in Wikidata, but they're not standardized there either. When our student workers started to reconcile the metadata using the names we had in our database, they often missed entries which exist because, for example, sometimes the term publisher was added by a previous Wikidata editor before the name of the publisher, sometimes after, sometimes as a qualifier in parentheses, sometimes they use the words publications instead. You know what? It's easy to think about all the problems we faced, but what's of help to the community is our successes. To date, we've uploaded more than 500 of the 1,700 publishers, and a Wikidata editor who's also a librarian in another Israeli institution has been helping us merge the items which we created without realizing that other items for that same publisher existed. With one successful project underway, we're beginning to work on the next so that mapping and planning can be finished when the staff that's uploading the publishers is ready to upload the next project. The Anonymous Jewish Classics project began as part of a hallway conversation at the International Federation of Library Associations World Library and Information Congress held last summer in Athens. The IFLA cataloging section already publicizes lists of authorized access points representing works for a number of cultures. We agreed that there's a lot of literature discussing Jewish religious works and many, many, many editions of those works, but libraries across the world use different terms to describe the resources. At first, we thought we would just make a list of what we in Israel call those works and what they're called in Library of Congress authority files. And then we thought, you know what? Let's add in the Wikidata Q number. National Library of Israel authority librarians had already been in contact with Wikidata editors who were working on what we call Aron HaSfarim HaYehudi, the canon set of Jewish religious texts. So we knew there was a certain amount of coverage in Wikidata already. We compiled a list of 535 anonymous Jewish classics, which we had had in another database from Aleph, which we had closed, and folded into our regular authority file. It was called the Database of Uniform Headings in Judaica. And we began finding the relevant identifiers by us in Library of Congress, Wikidata, and VIAF. When we heard that the PCC, the Program for Cooperative Cataloging, which is an international cooperative effort aimed at expanding access to library collections by providing useful, timely, and cost-effective cataloging that meets mutually accepted standards of libraries around the world, when we found out that they were launching a pilot project which really hit a lot of the areas of our concerns, like production rates and how to document sources for data elements and what meets the notability requirements, well, we jumped on it and we applied and we were accepted to the pilot project. This way we can take a project that we've already decided we were going to do and use it as a learning opportunity. In addition, because the PCC pilot exposes our project to other libraries right from the planning stage, we've had expressions of interest from abroad. Instead of doing all the work in-house, we hope to cooperate with librarians across the world. Beyond our two major projects, we started creating ongoing workflows which bear Wikidata in mind. We've begun on a select basis to enrich Wikidata from our authority records, particularly with information about related institutions and works and with identifiers. This is something that I worked on this morning because I happen to have been doing his authority record. When we start authority projects, such as our current push to create authority records for printers who produced Hebrew texts prior to 1830, we build the workflow with Wikidata already in the package so that it doesn't become an added burden. And when we work within our own authority files, we've started to enhance it with Wikidata Q numbers. In the future, we hope to do a project where we'll pull out of Wikidata all of the items which have our identifier. We actually have two identifiers in Wikidata, one for our Aleph system and one for our Alma system, and then plant them as an automatic process within our authority files. We also work with external projects like the Ben Yehuda project, which aims at making out-of-copyright Hebrew literature available for free online. They have authority identifiers. Their names don't necessarily match the forms that are available at the Library of Israel, at the National Library of Israel, VIAF, Wikidata, and we're helping them normalize their data so that they can pull information in from various sources, the beginning of helping them work with linked open data. We also work with outside researchers. We have a project going with Yossi Galron, who's the founder of the Lexicon of Modern Hebrew Literature, in which he's improving his lexicon by cross-checking his names with our authority database, Library of Congress, VIAF, and Wikidata. And we're helping, and he's helping us improve our authority files by giving us information we didn't have. We also give him our information, so everyone cross-fertilizes everyone else. And of course, we're taking care of our own. We're working to improve the structured metadata and the links to Wikidata in the 24,000 photos that we've uploaded to Wikicommons. When we have a good workflow built, then we will try to scale it up as we upload more and more pictures to Wikicommons. As I said at the start of my presentations, in some ways, the global pandemic hurt our year of wiki plans. I think it hurt everyone's plans this year. But on the Wikidata side, it really only did us good. Because we needed to find productive work for public services staff and for our student workers, while the library was closed to visitors, we had the opportunity to train people from outside technical services to do the normalization work and the uploading. That created cross-divisional teams which allowed technical services to explain the complexities of metadata management. When we started the Israeli Publishers Project, public services thought it would take a few weeks, maybe a month or two, to upload the data. Now that we've trained them to work with the data alongside us, they realize how complex taking non-normative data and putting it into Wikidata is. That means that they have a greater respect for what technical services does, and that's going to be of a lot of use in future cooperative projects, both within the wiki sphere and within our regular everyday library work. Also, working outside the hardcore of metadata librarians and teaching people who didn't know about the work that we do gave us a chance to create documentation in Hebrew, which was sorely lacking. We identified knowledge and understanding of how to work with OpenRefine as a crucial component of our efforts. And the fact that all sorts of things had to go online meant that we could take part in training sessions from places that we would never have been given the budget to travel to. We did 2 intensive sessions on OpenRefine with Monash University's Malaysia branch. There's a great series of OpenRefine and Wikidata workshops coming out of University of Ottawa. We would never have been able to participate in any of this stuff in a regular year because of COVID-19. We're there. Our authority file is named Mazal, Ma'agal Zuyot Leumi, the Israel National Authority Database, but the word Mazal is also the Hebrew word for luck. Our plans for Wikidata projects in the future based on Mazal is more hard work than it is luck. We've set goals on the operational side. We want to upload large parts of our authority database of Mazal based on our ability to add multilingualism to Wikidata entities, to add in other language forms, to add in other connections for people, for places, for corporate bodies, for families. We want to upload multiple IDs. In our own authority database, we have our IDs, Library of Congress IDs, VIAF, Rights Management Organization IDs, and after a national push, we've added ORCIDs to thousands of Israeli lecturers. Pretty much every current university lecturer in Israel has an ORCID, and that ORCID is in their authority file within Mazal, and we can contribute that to Wikidata. Because we have a history of working with people and with their errors when relevant, and negotiating what information we're going to make public within our authority database and what information we won't record so that it stays private, we can also make significant contributions to the discussion of ethical use of personal information within the wiki world, and we're really looking forward to those conversations. On the aspirational side, our goals include strengthening our reputation as an authoritative source of information, particularly about Israel and Jewish topics, and strengthening our partnerships within the library community, within the wiki community, and especially with the librarians who also are doing Wikidata work. We also want to serve as a support to projects like WikiCite. Since all of our Wikidata projects are based around bibliographic and authority information, we think we can make a significant contribution, especially given our multilingual authority records and the multiple IDs that we can contribute, which will really help with author disambiguation. Once we get our authority records into Wikidata, we can then start contributing things like article databases, particularly Rambi, which is a database of articles about Jewish studies. And that would really boost that part of Wikidata and WikiCite, which at this point isn't sufficiently developed. What do we need to get there from here? We have several concerns which we need to discuss in-house and with the wider community, which are also probably concerns of other mid-sized GLAM institutions. Our problems are multiplied by the mix of languages and cultures represented in our collections. And if we can solve our problems, we become a model for non-Anglophone and non-Western GLAMs. One problem is customization versus standardization. Locally, over the nearly 130 years of the library's existence, we've created a number of databases for in-house use. These databases, as you saw earlier, don't conform to international standards, and we need to decide how much to invest in bringing that metadata up to code so that it can be contributed. We might have jumped in over our heads in choosing the Israeli Publishers Database as our first large-scale project. We took a database which, in terms of standardized metadata, was in really sad shape, and in terms of ethics had never been explored. Over the course of the year, we had to sell the project over and over because it never ran smoothly. Had we chosen a database which was more standardized in the metadata structure, we might have had faster wins and so gotten easier buy-in from other departments. We have to sell it also by thinking about how much the information is worth to the wider world. Will its usefulness to others make it worth our investment in manpower? Can we sell it as being good citizenship? But our main problem is, how do we sell this investment to our management and to grant-giving institutions? Unlike Wikipedia and Wikicommons, Wikidata doesn't directly drive traffic back to our catalog or website, so it's harder to provide numbers as return on investment. On the Wikidata side, there's still issues of multiculturalism. Some of the metadata that we want to contribute, particularly about classical Jewish and Islamic authors, uses metadata which doesn't meet Wikidata standards, such as the use of culturally linked calendars. Because there isn't a one-to-one correspondence between the calendars, say between the Jewish calendar and the Christian calendar, the secular calendar, that means that we have to try to ascertain the hour of birth to do the conversion to the Christian calendar, or give up on the granularity of the exact day of birth so that we can convert the date to a format that Wikidata accepts. There's still cultural issues involved here in what Wikidata will accept as metadata. Our ability to convert the data from our cultures into what's acceptable to Wikidata will have implications for scalability, which is our next long-term concern. We've invested a lot of time and money in uploading the Israeli Publishers Database, and that's an investment we can't sustain over the other big projects we would like to do, which are much bigger than the Israeli Publishers Database. No matter how much we want to help the community, we still need to run the library. Future projects which are based on more standardized metadata will require less investment, but it's still really time-consuming, particularly because Open Refine Reconciliation doesn't handle multiple languages in a single search very gracefully. What other GLAMs can do in one pass, we have to do in 4 or more passes, which takes a lot of time. We have to find a way to scale our work so that we don't need to find investors and champions for each and every future project. Our last concern is reuse. The community will continue to find innovative ways of using the metadata we contribute, but we also need to find ways of taking the content that we're contributing to Wikidata and reuse it so that we can bring traffic to our catalog and to our website, as opposed to the Vanderbilt project where it was, let's think about what we can contribute to Wikidata. We understand what we're contributing to Wikidata, but for funding reasons, we also have to show what we're contributing to the National Library of Israel. We're currently looking at ways to reuse the publisher data in support of both open library initiatives and to help digital humanities scholars. We suspect that as we add more metadata into Wikidata, the opportunities for reuse will grow, but any such reuse will always require further investment of time and manpower, leading us back to the scalability issue. Is it worth all the work and all the salesmanship? I think so. I'm pretty sure everyone watching this does. but we still haven't fully convinced the people who make the funding decisions. And I think that, as much as anything else, is a task for those who are working at the intersection of libraries and Wikimedia. I would be thrilled to continue the conversation both over the course of the rest of this session in the Etherpad or beyond. Most social media, I go by my personal name. Drop me an email, drop me a tweet, hit me up on my user page on Telegram. I would love to continue the conversation with you.
Right, so a great presentation. I really love the fact that you've made the most of COVID and the opportunities to work with people who you wouldn't normally be able to participate in their events for so all around the world. It is a small positive out of quite a strange year, I would say. And the other thing that really resonates with me is you're talking about personal data in personal information in Wikimedia, and we were talking about that on Monday. I don't think anyone's got the answers about what the appropriate amount of information that we should be holding about people. Question I was asked was about researchers, whether we should be storing their email, for example, and just how much information we should have about people. So if you're having those conversations, I'd very much like to join you, and I know a lot of other people are interested in those topics as well.
One of the advantages of Israel being a low power distance, we don't play 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, we play 2 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Everyone knows someone who's connected to you. So authors feel no problem in contacting us and saying, you have my year of birth, get that off, I don't like it. Oh, but we need it to disambiguate, but okay, we understand you don't want it. What can you give me instead? And we're constantly negotiating with authors about the information that's in their authority files. So by the time we've finished with an authority file, it's information that they've agreed to make public. And we even have an author questionnaire that on top says, we want you to look over your information because we will be making this available nationally and internationally. So make sure you're comfortable. And if at any point in the future you're not, let us know and we will work with you to get it to a state that you are comfortable. So if it's in our database, it's author approved.
I think you have just answered the first question there about the communicating with researchers that were in Aleph, that they're going to have their information put into Wikidata. It sounds like you've got an ongoing conversation with people, and or there's certainly channels of communication that are open if people have issues.
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, sometimes it goes to an extreme. I've had authors call me on the day of my daughter's wedding, half an hour before the wedding. When I told her I was kind of busy, she said I could call her back after the ceremony. But yeah, it's a really close communication.
We have another question as well about whether the catalogers were receptive to adding Wikidata into their workflows.
Yeah, because we had already been pushing Wikipedia, and some of them didn't feel very comfortable with Wikipedia, but then suddenly we say, here's a project that you can work on. You can get the same glory that the Wikipedia people are getting in the library, but it's the kind of stuff you like doing anyway.
Did anyone, for example, ask or question whether it's just another identifier, or was that actually a selling point to them? It's something quite familiar.
Because we had found that VF had problems disambiguating particularly Asian authors. And once we started adding in multiple identifiers into our authority records and adding multiple identifiers from our authority records into Wikidata, we noticed the clustering got better. So we could sell it. Here we have a proven case, business case. You want your data to work right, add in the identifiers on both sides.
I think it's quite interesting to see how quickly VF update when Wikidata identifies a merge that's needed. They're obviously paying a lot of attention to what a human community of editors doing. And I think it's really important that we're able to work together, because obviously you can do a lot with machine reading and all clever algorithms, but a human will spot things that a computer won't. So being able to monitor Wikidata does identify those mergers, and they seem to be onto it, which is great.
Mhm.
So I think that's all the questions. Let me just scan through the Etherpad. There's just a comment saying, I love that your authority file is named after Look, which I think is quite charming as well. Yeah,
Well,
I think
it's actually a double thing, because mazel is luck, but also because it's an abbreviation. In Hebrew, you use like a single quotation marks. So you've got the first letter, and then the abbreviation for a person who's dead of blessed memory is Zal. So it's also, yeah, what are the dead people? Because that's one of our hobbies as librarians. We like to add in the 046 subfield G and close off death dates as soon as someone dies.
it is nice to have completeness in metadata. Probably not so nice in that particular respect, but
It gives you a
not
sense of
for the people anyway. That was great. Thank you very much for coming to talk to us today. I really enjoyed your
for having
presentation.
me.
Okay, very welcome. I think it's time for Alice now, so I'll switch over the screens. Hi there, Alice.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yourself?
It's just been raining a lot today, so yeah, it's a bit miserable here.
Yeah, same here, to be honest. Are you in the library there?
Yes, I am in the library.
Very
as
appropriate.
you see. Yeah.
Okay, do you have your slides ready?
I do have them. Do you want me to share my screen?
Yeah, if you share your screen, I can add your slides and I will take myself out of the stream.
All right, let me do that. Okay, just hold on. Okay. No, just hold on, please.
Okay, no worries.
There you are.
Okay, I can see them. There we are. So I will remove myself and leave you to present.
All right. Let me know. Just hoot when you're out. All right. Is April a good evening? It's evening here. Is everybody able to hear me or see my screen? You could just grant or hoot, and then I'll go ahead with whatever it is I need to say. All
Yeah,
right,
we
I
can
haven't
hear
got
you.
any
Yeah.
answer, but okay, fine. Good evening, everybody. Like I said, it's evening here, and my name is Alice Kibombo, and I am the Wikipedian in residence with AFLIA, and that's an organization we're going to get to know more about today. I know this is WikiCite, and you know Wikidata is the overarching subject, but just allow me to take a few minutes of your time to explain this project, Wikipedia in African Libraries, and then I'll also let you know the plans that we have for Wikidata as a collective, and then we'll be open to the questions. So without further ado, let me just dig into this. So you ask, what is this? First of all, it is a year-long project that is being funded by the Wikimedia Foundation, and we had collaborated before as a collective with the Wikimedia Foundation, but then in June of this year is when we officially received the grant to bring this to fruition. So Wikimedia Foundation's money and our collective human resource is what is bringing Wikipedia in African libraries to you as the project. And then obviously before that, it's not something that, you know, just dropped through the roof. There had to be something that informed its existence, something that justified its existence. And what you see on the screen are things that we knew before, but as of September 2020, we had a survey of librarians in Africa, and what you're seeing on the screen are results that came from over 350 respondents, and that number has still grown, but some of the statistics are constant. So over 80% of them spoke English, and then 9.1% spoke French, and then the Portuguese speaking ones came in at 7.8%. But what I knew, or what we knew, and what was compounded by the findings was that over half of them were not aware of Wikimedia communities in their countries, which meant that many Wikimedia communities were not able to participate in GLAM projects because they didn't have the necessary expertise. And then the librarians who showed any interest did not know where they could get any kind of local support on the ground. And then there were more females that responded, more females than male, and most were between the 31 to 50 years demographic. And with this situation, this pointed out the opportunities that we could now begin to leverage because, okay, fine, a great number of them speak English, which means that, or when we come to this, our main mode will be in English, and then the French and the Portuguese will have to be cared for. And if 54% are not aware of the communities in their countries, then we need to do something to bring the two communities together so that each can feed off each other's expertise and skills and network. And then when it comes to more females than male, obviously these can help us bridge the gender gap. And then being 31 to 50 years old means that we're dealing with a generation that's at least a bit technically savvy. So we don't have to, much as technical literacy is an issue, it is not something that we have to start from scratch on. Okay, so I had mentioned AFLIA. It is an acronym, but AFLIA in full is it's a mouthful. It's African Libraries and Information Associations. I hope I got it right. So it was started in 2013. It is based in Ghana. And from the screen, you can see the interests that the organization pursues, because it combines so many people in so many different information institutions. So it pursues the interests of library and information associations, the same services, and the workers and the communities that are its constituencies. It's present. It has a presence in over 30 countries, and this presence is managed regionally. We're divided into 5: the north, the south, the east, the west, and the central. And because it is spread over 30 countries, obviously there are the Anglophone speakers and the Francophone speakers, and then we have the Lusophone demographic. And yeah, so that's AFLIA, and that's the existing situation. So you say, okay, this Africa in Wikipedia and African Libraries project, how is it that we're going to go about it? First and foremost, it's a year long. It's not something that's a flash in the pan for 1 month. It's a sustained campaign that's going to take place over 12 months, and we started that in September. At the moment, we're doing some background work, but I'll come to that later. And how we're going to implement it, I'll still explain. We are going to use the OCLC curriculum, but one of the things that we noted coming into the project was that the curriculum is good as it is, but we needed to tailor it to the African situation, use terms, context, illustrations, and things that were relatable to our environment. So we're going to be using that. And then later I'll show you the quantitative metrics. that we are going to carry it out in 3 phases, with 1 pilot group that's starting in November, and then 2 cohorts with 150 participants each. And then when it comes to the community liaisons, we'll use the country champions, because these are drawn from existing librarians within the community who have shown a willingness to actually partner with the Wikimedia Foundation to spread the Wiki gospel. And then we will also use experienced Wikimedians to facilitate the learning. There's going to be a lot of learning, slides, classroom settings, and everything. And we will need experienced librarians. Experienced Wikimedians, preferably librarians, to be able to facilitate the learning experience and the courses. And these are some of the timelines we are working in. This is very, very brief, very, very brief. There's a lot that comes in between, but as it is right now, we have already revised the curriculum and submitted it, and it's awaiting an evaluation. But as of November 16th, we are going to have a pilot group, just test a few bits of the curriculum with them, and it's going to have built-in pathways for the feedback. And then come Jan 2021, between January and February, will take around 4 weeks for that. And the mentor groups are the country champions that I was talking about, that are going to act as liaisons. Obviously, not everything is on their shoulders, and because they are just, they're just volunteering, we do not honestly expect them to know anything, but we also can't just send them out just like that. So we will have, some training to be able to, how can I say, equip them to deal with the kind of situations that they're going to be facing, be it with practical work, be it with supporting the librarians that they will eventually be liaising with. And then between February and April of 2021, we will roll out the first cohort, and then we'll roll on smoothly till May, between May and July of 2021. In May of 2021, we will have our, how can I put it, the AFLIA general meeting that will be in Ghana. And we will have a Wikipedia workshop there, but we will also start with cohort 2, because a number of librarians that are catered for by AFLIA will not be able to attend that physically. And yeah, we come to our areas of focus. I'll just keep harking on to this. There's no relationship. Okay, there is, but it is so minimal that it's not yielding anything at the moment. So between the librarians and the local Wikimedia communities, there is such a minimal relationship that sees very many communities not participating in GLAM-related events because they don't have the expertise, they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the manpower, and then the librarians are also left out because they do not know who to consult with. So one of our areas of focus is to cultivate relationships between these 2 communities and also with the wider community. And we are going to do this through a series of virtual meet and greets. And I'll be sharing that information via email, so tune in for that. And then the other thing is we are open to partnerships. Different partners come with different advantages, and they come with different skill sets, and they give you ideas that you had probably never even thought of. So I know that's a very, very generic way of putting it. That's very vague and open to interpretation, but something that we will explore much later on. And then we're also going to be looking at opportunities for offline contribution. Bear in mind that this is Africa. The bandwidth isn't that big. The internet speeds are not that fast. There are power cuts in very many different places. The internet goes off with political unrest. So one of the solutions for that is exploring opportunities for offline contributions. And then the English Wikipedia and the French Wikipedia are really big. So the Francophone and Anglophone librarians do have a wide community for support. I mean, they cannot, of all the things that they cry about, they can't put their hands on their heart and say that we didn't have any support from the wider community. But then our colleagues that speak Portuguese are really being left behind. And that's for a number of reasons. You know, as a collective, we don't have very many contacts in the Lusophone community, and then we will also need to speak Portuguese to the people that speak Portuguese. So we need to mobilize support for the Portuguese speaking librarians, bring them up to speed so that they're equally as competent and knowledgeable about the project as their Anglophone and Francophone counterparts. And then we're going to focus on Wikipedia mostly for starters, though we will focus on other projects like Wikidata, but that will run parallel. But our main focus will be on Wikipedia. And then we'll also focus on local languages. We need to contribute and grow our local language Wikipedias, because for very many librarians, especially the reference librarians, you go to the library and they can point out the resource in English or French or whichever foreign language it is that they speak. But when they are beginning to explain the content, they are only able to explain it in their local language. So if they're able to explain the content in their local language, then they should be able to contribute it in the online sphere. And then we will also be looking at Africa specific content, obviously on the premise that we tell our stories better, but that's subject to debate on very many occasions. And then if all goes well, these are just the quantitative metrics. We are looking at 300 participants for the online training. Like I said, 2 cohorts of 150 people each, which would mean 300 newly registered users. I do not expect that everyone doesn't have an account now, but then, you know, I'm hoping for the domino effect where, you know, different people tell different people and then they also join. So we're wildly optimistic on that. And then we're also optimistic at 100 content pages that have been created or improved across the Wikimedia projects. And then we're looking at 100 librarians joining the One League One Year campaign in Jan 2021. But I need to give a word of caution on this, and this is not shooting ourselves in the foot. It's just that numbers can be very deceptive. I'll give you an example that we had in May when we did the African Librarians Week and we concentrated on One League One Web. We had a total of around 832 people signing up on the dashboard. And then the eventual submissions was something like, say, 100 or 110, give or take. So quantitative metrics might be a little bit deceptive, but we will go with that for now. But then on the qualitative side, that also cannot be measured. But in an ideal situation, we would want the project to be branded on people's consciousness, you know, so that even if they do not participate in the project, even if they don't contribute, it is there at the back of their minds, you know. I'm not saying that they should sleep, dream, breathe it, but they will know about it. You know, if somebody mentioned it, they would know what it is that they're talking about. But we would also look at cultivating an awareness of Wikipedia as a local resource, especially for librarians. That is one of the qualitative metrics that we're looking at. Like I said, it is not measurable, but I think we will see those effects after time. And then we would also like to see the collective filling in information gaps in a synchronized manner. You know, you do a thematic contribution. So the effort is it's focused and it is meant to be impactful. And with this project, I am talking about it right now, but I do not work alone. I work with a team in AFLIA. I work with people from the Wikimedia Foundation, and I also work with a curriculum development consultant. So these are my colleagues in the project. You will get to meet them in the course of the work that we do. And they are very knowledgeable, not even just because that they're older than me, but they have been in the field much longer, and they are very aware of the landscape and the environment in which we operate as African librarians. So that is the team from AFLIA. We have Dr. Helen Asamoah Hassan. She's the founder of AFLIA actually, as well as the executive director. We have Dr. Nkem Osuigwe. She is the Director of Human Capacity and Training, and the Curriculum Development Consultant, and I really work hand in hand with her to identify opportunities and tweak the curriculum. And then we have Stanley. Stanley is very helpful in letting us, test the waters and tell us what is out there, because it's the research that he carried out that let us know that over 50% of the librarians we were dealing with were not aware of the Wikimedia communities. And then Doreen, for lack of a better word, she is the sergeant at arms for the project. Monitor their activities. They see that things are on schedule, and the challenges that the participants are having, and be able to sort them out. And then this is the team from the Wikimedia Foundation. We have Alex Benson and Felix Mate. It is a pleasure to work with them. I believe a number of us here in this audience have worked with them before, so I will not sing their praises any further than I have sung them for now. And then for the curriculum development consultant that was hired for the project is Professor Rosemary Shafak. She's from Cameroon, and a lot of the content that you will see out there is because a lot of the content and even the quantity of the content is a testament to how much thought and input she has put in readapting this curriculum. Obviously, when I come in, it's simply to point out one or two things that were an oversight. And then on the right is me when I was younger and more stressed. So yeah. And then any activities so far with the project? I've put two activities here. The one strictly led to the other. The African Librarians Week that dealt with One Live, One Ref. That was between the 25th and the 30th of May. But it is after this that we really amped to be able to get the grant. And then just last week, we participated in the Open Access Week, and our contribution was translating specifically cinema-themed content, because we were commemorating the months of African cinema too that are running between October and November. Yeah, so like I had said, that was about Wikipedia, and WikiCite is really about Wikidata. So how about Wikidata? Are we thinking about it? Yes, we are. And these are some of the things that are making us think about it. The original focus was on Wikimedia, but then we have parallel ways, because there's something for everybody, and you will find that there are people who don't want to contribute content, and they say the threshold for entry onto Wikipedia is too high, so I'd rather deal with Wikidata or with Wikicommons or with Wikisource or whatever. But the existing situation right now in Africa, and even with the constituents of AFRIA, is that the libraries that are big, the libraries that are active, the libraries that actually have an impact, they are academic, and they're designated as national depositories, meaning they have a lot of information. How, when, and why they should release it is a matter of debate, but for me, it's a mindset change. And then with this comes the fact that a number of African librarians are being increasingly skilled, and we have those that specialize specifically in metadata. So that's a demographic to be tapped into in case they don't want to, write the text and they just want to use strings. And then last week when I checked, this was something from July of 2029, but I saw that around 43% of the items on Wikidata are scholarly articles. And right now, the biggest emphasis is on scholarly publishing in Africa. At least that's the landscape. So that leaves us the question. I could put it to you. I also ask myself, but now that I'm presenting it to you, how can we leverage this? I mean, what opportunities do we see in this? Is there something that is focused? Is there something that can come out of this? Is there something that can be thematic? Is there a skill set to be transferred here? Something that can be shown like, okay, this is how you enrich your work. This is how you put your content on show. So this is something we need to consider as this community, and all the suggestions at this point are welcome and we hope to act on them. So this is where you can know more about us. AFIA does have a page on Wikipedia. It also has a website. I did not provide the link for the Wikipedia in African Libraries meta page, but you can read all about the grant on the grant page. So anything it is that I have not left out, you can familiarize yourself more, and then you could also address your questions, and I expect I will be in a position to answer as honestly as I can and as wisely as my brains will permit. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for this invitation, and the questions can begin.
Sorry, not at all prepared there. Thank you. That was a great presentation, Alice. We do have a few questions. The first one is, how can we help mobilize support for Lusophone librarians? Is there anything as a user group that we can be doing to support that work?
At the moment, no, there is no established Lusophone speaking user group in Africa. What we have are a few individual editors from, let's say, you'll know one person in Mozambique, then you'll know two from Sao Tome and Principe, then one who is between Zambia and Angola. So no, we do not have an established community. So this is an opportunity to actually cultivate a community, or to have really specific and targeted targeted efforts toward this community. Because even when it comes to the online classes, we will be translating the work into French and into Portuguese. It's one thing seeing this, with Portuguese subtitles, but it's another thing when this session is delivered to you in a language that you actually understand. Because when they translate, they're translating context. They are not translating word for word.
So that's a piece of work that you haven't really started digging into yet, and you've got to build the connections to engage with people.
Right.
Okay, thank you. I think another question we've got is there a working project for North African countries, and that's the Arabic-speaking nations?
Good question, because I actually noticed that I think it's only Egypt that is covered by AFLIA. The opportunity here is during the virtual meet and greets, we are obviously still going to get the North African communities and their library associations and get them together. And much as the project is under AFLIA, it is not a must that anybody who participates in it must be a member of AFRIA. I mean, the basic minimum is to be a practicing information professional. Well, not practicing, but an information professional, and you can prove that.
So I'm just having a look. We've got a couple more questions. Do you manage to coordinate with WISCOM, the African Regional Hub?
Yes, we do. We are in touch because WISCOM is actually what's helping us get in touch with many of the local communities. And also we needed to, how can I say, not that we lacked credibility, but people were very skeptical about this project. It was big, it was ambitious, and very many people were not buying into it. So we needed to employ the help of WISCOM to put in a word for us on that when it came to the time to sell the project to the people.
And we have another question about did you manage to participate with Wikidata and Wikiarabia to have more contributors?
Yes, we would like to have that, but as we speak, Wikidata has been postponed to November 2021. So what we could do now is just cultivate the interest, cultivate the awareness, and empower people that they're active enough to be able to show what work it is they've done within the project and within the community when it comes to selection time for Wikidata.
That's great, thank you. Going to bring in Houcemeddine now. He's in Tunisia, so I'd just be interested to bring him into the conversation.
I was in the background here, so I was managing the stage and coordinated several staff. So I was really interested by the work you are doing.
Thank you.
So maybe I should start, I think.
Yeah, well, if you want to start. So I'll thank you very much, Alice. Brilliant presentation, and good luck with your project.
Thank you very much for your time and for the opportunity to be able to speak about this. And I hope that we will be in touch sooner than later.
Yeah,
Cheers
we'll stay in
now.
touch. Thank you very much. Okay, I will remove myself from the presentation and leave Houcemeddine to introduce himself.
Well, I am a member of Wikimedia and Library User Group. So I have been with Simon, with Merrilee and others here working on libraries and reference reports on Wikimedia projects. And it was fun for me during these years to work with them. So what I'm showing today is about Scholia tool, which is a tool that uses the bibliographic information that is included in, maybe I should, well, okay, that shows the bibliographic data that is involved in Wikidata to show like of an overview of the impact and the productivity of institutions, scientists, etc. Well, what I search here is how we can make use of Scholia and promote it to be a platform of living scientometric studies. So here, this is the introduction. So let me just give a definition of scientometric studies. So scientometric study is a research study that tries to analyze the quantitative, qualitative, and behavior evolution of scholarly research efforts. Well, such efforts can be the research publications or the career of an individual, the research publications of the recipients of a specific distinction or honors, the research publications on a given topic, the publications of a research institution, the publications that are built as part of a research project or as a part of a grant, the research publications of a sovereign state, the research publications during a specific period of time, for example, the 80s, the 90s, the period of the years 2000, etc., etc. Well, some research studies couple to use the combination of two of these criteria. For example, they analyze a topic of interest in a sovereign state. They analyze the productivity of a research project during a specific period of time. So this will increase the complexity of the task. Well, now, as you already know, there are plenty of scientometric studies that some of them are useful, but some of them are useless and are just done as reports. And this will be a waste of time, a waste of efforts, etc., etc. Well, the scientometric study here is structured using the IMRAD format, which stands for Introduction, Methods, Results, Discussion, and Conclusion. The introduction gives an overview about the analyzed entity in its context. For example, a disease. For a disease, the symptoms, etc., etc., and a list of scientometric studies about the entity. The methods part discusses the nature of data used, bibliographic metadata, altmetric statistics like page view statistics, download statistics, etc., scientific citations, the type of application analyzed, the period covered, the countries, the keywords used for the query, the data source, the citation index that is used, Web of Science, or in this case, the Wikidata, the bibliographic information, and the methods used for processing the data. Is that natural language processing? Is this statistical analysis, network analysis, etc.? Well, the results include raw scientometric indices and metrics, the number of citations, the H index. These are numbers that give an overview of what the set of data is built, of the quantity and the quality of the data it includes, etc., etc. So they are concise and can give a global kind of information about the analysis set. There are the standardized indicator with respect to the given criterion, the relative indicators. There are the scientometric networks and derivation of centrality indicators, for example, citation networks, co-citation network, collaboration networks, bibliographic complex networks, and there are also the statistical distributions and correlations, which give an overview about the homogeneity of the set and how it is structured. Is there some exceptions to the data in the positive or negative way, etc., etc.? Well, the discussion part is mainly built upon comparisons. Well, it can be the comparison with previous results of the same entity. It can be the comparisons with the results of other entities of the same class. It can be the comparison of the entity with a generalized one, etc., etc. And the conclusion is the use of these comparisons to infer the significant differences between the analyzed entity and the other entities in relations with it. Well, as you see here, Scholia has been built as a tool of scholarly profiling. Well, it is based on SparkQL queries that can be built, that can be used to query a knowledge graph and extract specific information in real time to extract features of the productivity and the citation impact of scholarly publications for another prize winners, etc., etc. So as you see, if Scholia could make a success to infer such information from Wikidata using SparkQL queries that can be managed in real time, why do we lose time to build kind of scientometric studies on our own? So we can just build kind of SparkQL queries to manage all the sections of scientometric studies and build a SparkQL based scientometric study that can be updated in real time and in every moment, and that can live longer as long as the Wikidata bibliographic information is updated and enriched. So as you see here, SparkQL queries can show a variety of visualizations. Well, let me demo some of the stuff of Scholia tool to see how it works. So let me show you the first example. Oh, yeah, this works. Okay. So here you have Tunisia. So as you see here, you can choose because Tunisia can be a topic, can be a location, or can be a country. For example, you can choose the scientometric study of the publications done in Tunisia. So when you do that, you will click here. And if you are working to kind of see the research output about Tunisia as a topic, you can click here, etc., etc. And location is here. So you can skip from one side to another as you like. Well, so as you see here, they are making the topic in context here, in topic. So, and here you can see they are given all the publications that are written about Tunisia. Here is the papers by publication year, the earliest works, the most publishing author, the co-author graph, the topics that are co-occurring with this topic in scientific publication. There is the topic co-occurrence graph. Here is the co-occurring topic maps. That means the locations that are put as topics to papers about Tunisia. You see here, there is Portugal, there is Italy, there is China, Russia, I think. This is Russia. Okay. And here is some statistics about the authors, the venues, journal values, the citations, the most cited authors, the organizations working on this topic. The citation graph, this is about the countries. This is not working. Okay, and the awards received by others who published about the topic. So this is interesting. So as I said before, that the topic in context can be the introduction of the scientometric study. So if you do this visualization in the introduction part of scientometric studies, this can manage the work on the introduction. But however, this is only available when we are dealing with topics. With other types of entities, this kind of visualizations does not exist. So this should be generalized to all types of entities, not only topics. So let's see Tunisia as a country. Yeah. So we see here the organizations in that country, the others that have roots from the country, even if they do not work in Tunisia. Locations as topic. You see that Tunisia people are mainly working on Tunisia. This is normal. Narrative location as well. The collaboration map. You see that Tunisia is collaborating with institutions all over the world, etc. But you see that this is not exhaustive. They could be enriched with other visualizations. For example, the country collaboration network, for example, this can give more added value to this. So let's return here and show the example of other. Oh. Yeah, this works. For the others as well, there is the list of publications here. There is the publications by year. There is the number of pages per year. There is the venue statistics. The journals and conferences where the publications are published the most. The color graph, you see this is rich, interesting. The topics, the associated image, these are images related to the publications and to the author himself. The topic work matrix, this is the table of the combination of topics and works. See here, there is the timeline where the first when the first publications has been issued, when the latest publications has been issued, etc., etc. When he moved to Data Science Institute, etc., etc. And this is the academic tree. It gives an idea about his seniors, etc., etc. So you can manage it so that you can be hierarchical like this, and you can see the ancestors, the scientific ancestors of the author himself. So here is Ostiloreki, etc., etc. From the beginning, this is the root to the top, the senior of the author. And there's the location, the citation statistics, the citations by year, the cite and others, the events, etc., etc. So just a brief word concerning the citations. The citations are not supported as they should be in Wikidata, and that's why a distorted image citations and of citation impact is shown on Scholia. But if this is solved using the inclusion of open citations, this can be solved on Scholia, and we can have more exhaustive information. Okay, let's move. This is about institutions. Well, okay, so this is a word. Well, I don't know why it is shown as a word. It is mainly an organization. So you can shift, you can see it as you like, you can see it as a sponsor, you can see it as a location, as I said before. So let's just restrict ourselves to other organizations. So you see for the university, you can have the list of the employees and researchers. You can have the co-author graph inside the university. You can have the advisors graph. You can have the topics that are worked on at the institution. It is here the University of Oxford. You can have the recent publications, the page productions, the number of pages that are written each year. Well, it is still running, and this is one of the disadvantages of SparkQL at points, as when there are many requests, it can be so long, etc. So this is the citations and the gender distribution. Well, let's move. So sometimes, well, they can handle kind of comparison between others, but as you see, this is not a kind of exhaustive comparison. It should be further worked. So, for example, you can have only the list of jointly authored works for for 3 compared authors, the number of works per year, the number of citations per year, and it is not comparative. You see, the layout is not seeming to be comparison. Maybe the type of data the type of visualization, the mode of visualization should be changed. There is the co-author graph that include the 3 others. So it is mainly a profile about the collaboration between the 3 others rather than a comparison between their performance, their output. Let's move. So as we have seen, well, Wikimedia Scholia profiles just show raw visualization of results without any discussion, without these contextualizations, except partially for the topics profiles. Well, scientometric profiles are not personalized. For example, you cannot use the combinations, as I said in the introduction. For example, you cannot create a profile for a given country in a given period, or for a given person working in a given institution, etc., etc. For each entity, also, a limited series of visualizations is represented. For example, the network of the individual collaborations is represented in the profile of given country. However, the network of institutional collaborations is not represented in the same scientometric profile, even if this institutional collaboration network seems to be more important piece of information. Well, what we think is that instead of people writing reports and writing scientometric reports every day and then get wasted within a certain time because they get outdated, after a significant period of time, what we are thinking of is to convert Scholia into a scientometric study that can be updated in real time. So to achieve this interesting objective, we need to construct SPARQL queries based on Wikidata's linked bibliographic data to represent each constituent of a scientometric study. So the task here for the introduction, as I said, the analyzed entity should be put in context using kind of relational representation, a graph, a semantic graph for all entities, not only for research topics. Well, also, there is a list of scientometric works on the entity should be put, and this is not supported, mainly as there is no SPARQL query for that, but also because the publication types are not currently supported on Wikidata. And also, there are Wikidata items for publication types that are not linked to research publications for the moment. So maybe some works and efforts should be done on that direction. As I said, they cannot make couplet analysis of two entities and analyze combinations of factors, etc., etc. And this can be worked on, as I have shown before. Concerning the methods, well, the method part assumes that there should be a document that explains how Scholia profiles generate its visualization. And this exists in several parts, but there is no centralized methodological paper that is integrated within the Scholia interface itself. This can be done, and when profile is shown, you can have how methodology or methods button that is shown there, so that people can know how this has been done, further than the link to the queries that are existing before. Well, one of the matters about methods also is that the Scholia profiles are not making use of the multilingual characteristic of Wikidata. Well, although Wikidata is multilingual, they are not using this fact to make Scholia profile multilingual, and this should be worked on as well. Well, concerning the results, as you see here, on Wikidata, there is a focus on books and scientific publications, but there is limited work about nomenclature, for example, ISOs, documents, patents, and legal text. And I think this should be supported on Wikidata and after that on Scholia, so that we can have more exhaustive scientometric analysis that consider further than the research part, the research and development part as well. Well, as I said, the support of research types is vital and is not available for the moment. The support of metrics and indicators also is not available. Also, the importance of these metrics to give an overview of the topic before crawling the details, etc., and seeing them and going into the details of the details, etc., etc. Maybe some numbers, some summary numbers can give you an overview about how to think and how to consider the volume and citation quality and quantity of the works that have been analyzed. Well, the support of statistical distributions. Well, this is shown by some visualizations. For example, there are the publications per year, the publications for each area, etc., etc. They are represented using histograms, etc. But there is no evaluation of the scientometric distribution laws. For example, the Bradford laws. And thus, we cannot evaluate if these distributions are homogeneous or not. Okay, the statistical correlation study. So this is also not supported by Scholia. I think that for the 2 points I have cited now, that if the Wikidata query surface support correlations and statistical significance measures within its front end, I think this can be solved and give an added value to a Scholia tool. Well, let's move. The scientometric networks are partially supported now. There are a few scientometric networks that are represented, and I think that more comprehensive representations is required. The support our scholarly citations, this is not supported as it should be, and I think that there should be more work on the mass upload of open citations database by using, for example, a bot or by the use of federated SparkQL queries. So this can be thought. The centrality indicators within scientometric networks, this does not work as well. And there is the altmetric indicators. Well, these altmetric indicators are important. So as you know, in Wikimedia projects, we have already the support of several types of altmetric indicators. For example, we have the Wikipedia page views of several papers. We have the Wikipedia citations of several papers. We have the page view of Wikipedia biographies of some scientists, institutions, countries, etc., etc. And so we can include this into Scholia as well as a part of the results. Well, let's move. Well, the comparison stuff for the discussion part, they are not supported because there is no statistical significant measure in SparkQL endpoints. And I think that the addition of the statistical significance measures can have a positive effect of the value and the quality of the outcomes of the profiles and the analyses of scholarly publications and careers, institutions, prize winners, etc., etc. Countries as well. So this should be taught as well. Concerning the conclusion as well, as we do not have statistical significance measures, we cannot draw conclusions. That's evident. Let's move to the conclusion now. So the take-home message here is that the creation of linked bibliographic data in RDF format on Wikidata is of great use in scientometric analysis. This enables the real-time, quantitative and qualitative analysis of the evolution of scientific research using SparkQL, and this can be easily enriched, validated, and developed from other resources, as it is also a set of RDF triples. So it is easy to manipulate using bots. Scholia is an interface that uses the SparkQL query language to generate scientometric profiles for several types of scientific entities, as I have shown. The profiles are updated as Wikidata is updated, and the profile can be enriched by adding SparkQL queries allow the interface to become a platform for living systematic scientometric studies. Thank you. So that's all. So, okay.
That's great. Thank you very much, Houcemeddine. There's no questions in the Etherpad, but one I would ask for you is, how can librarians get involved in this? I mean, is there any way that the custodians of information about scholarly communications can contribute from their institution into a project like this?
Well, I think that there are some institutions that are working on something similar, which is the living systematic review. But I think that the living scientometric study is more easier to do than systematic review, because we already have the staff and we already have the automated data and the data models for bibliographic metadata, etc., etc. And we have the altmetric data and metrics, etc., etc. So all is defined well, and I think we can move forward on this. But I wonder why no one has thought about that for the moment. And that's why I am making this to the table to see how people can interact with this.
I think a lot of the time the reason institutions aren't engaging with new things is just the amount of staff time it would take, and getting buy-in from administrators is incredibly difficult. To say, we want to start this new project, it's a complete break from what we've been doing before. Can we do this on top of all of our other work? And usually the answer is no, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We have on the agenda now time for a discussion, so I'm going to bring in everyone else and open it up.
Yeah, she's on phone. Alice is there. No,
So I actually had a thought. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
One of the things that came into my mind when Ahava was talking was about this issue of what information you do or don't put into Wikidata. And one of the questions that I struggled with when trying to, get a complete sort of list of Vanderbilt faculty in was what to do about the sex or gender property. And, that is clearly one of the most widely used properties, but it's also one that's a very sensitive property for people. It's not a property that you want to get wrong. And so I kind of struggled with, is this actually a property that I should try to add or not? And I decided to go ahead and do that, partly because one of the things I was really interested in looking at was like equity among departments relative to gender. And if you go to the Vanderbilt landing page, there's some Sparkle queries that you can run there. Like, one of the first things that I wanted to do was to see what was a gender breakdown by department in the university. And it's a kind of thing that I don't think Vanderbilt publishes anywhere. But, now we actually can look at that, the gender balance among researchers, and see that, like, computer engineering is like 92% men, and nursing is like 95% women. I mean, these are things that you can't know in another way. But I did feel I probably spent 25% of the human time that I worked on with Vanderbilt going to people's web pages manually and checking to see what pronouns they use. And so it was like very labor intensive. So anyway, I don't know if anybody has any thoughts related to that, but this was something where there was like potentially good payoff, but also a lot of work, and also kind of fraught with, and there were also some non-gender binary researchers who didn't get a sex or gender because of the whole, it's still an open issue in the Wikidata community as to separating out biological sex from gender.
We were talking about this on Monday, and I was thinking about it afterwards, and I kind of arrived at your point that if we don't have sex or gender property, we can't address the biases that we should be. And so it's a really difficult challenge because, as you say, it can be very sensitive. We can't always infer from names. We can do it a lot of the time, and we can be right a lot of the time, but when we're wrong, it can be a big problem. So it's a conversation that keeps on coming up, but we don't make any progress on it because I don't think anyone has the answer.
Well, one of the things that so I decided to approach it in the same way that I approached all the other data that I was trying to put in, which is recognizing that there's a possibility of error, like try to get as accurate metadata as possible, recognizing there's a possibility of error and trying to fix it later. And so one of the things that I feel Wikidata gives you, for example, as the profiles of the researchers get better and they start having personal links to, say, their personal web pages, which is something that's definitely possible, then it could be possible to create a bot that would then go to the personal web pages and look at the distribution of pronouns in those pages and then flag ones that are potentially wrong for a human to look at. So I think the linked nature of Wikidata gives us possibility for improving the quality of the data through queries of that sort.
It's interesting. That's about the only way I could ever think of doing it, because it's very difficult to find a source that says someone is male or female or any other gender alignment that they identify with. So you do have to rely on pronouns a lot of the time, and it's time consuming. So if there's an automated way of doing it, it would be fantastic, because then at least we can reference those statements, which generally we're not doing. So.
And here you're thinking as an English speaker, possibly Welsh.
Me?
True. We have a highly gendered language. So your gender is reflected in not only the equivalent of pronouns, but also in verbs and adjectives. And if someone doesn't identify with their grammatical gender, they make it a point to say something, because there are only two grammatical genders, male and female. It's also something that we ask in our author questionnaires. We used to ask gender, male or female, and now we just ask gender and we leave it open. But on the other hand, that gives us the advantage that transgender are not identified unless they say that they're transgender. If they use the grammatical female, then we identify them as female. If they use grammatical male, we identify them as male, and we never ask what they were assigned at birth. So it's easier to accept the real identity as opposed to the identity that was given to them as a baby.
It throws up so many interesting questions, because do we even need to know this about an author? It doesn't affect their ability to write or publish a work.
Especially in Hebrew, where there are more and more names that work for both genders to disambiguate. When you have two people with the same name and one identifies as male and one identifies as female, and your resource uses the female gender language, then it belongs to the one who identifies as female, not to the one that identifies as male. And we use that all the time to flag misattributed resources.
Persistent identifier would do that, though, without having to get into such personal details. But that's being a bit pedantic. So.
It would be great if everyone used it, but we can't get people to keep using persistent identifiers when they publish.
Yeah, I guess they're not born with one either, are they? Well, they might actually be, but that could also be private information that's on their birth certificate.
Congratulations, it's a baby. Here's an orchid.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, what other information is nice to have, but we don't really need? I'm thinking sort of date of birth. We don't really need it for living people who are still publishing. for historical people, it's really useful to have. But when we're talking about researchers, I'm not so sure that we would need it.
Again, if you have a persistent identifier, you don't. But we actually have a case of we have two separate cases of two authors in the same field, in the same department, of the same university, with the same name. Two of them, in one of the cases, they were born day after day. So not only do we note their year of birth, but their month of birth and their date of birth. And that's the only way we can tell the difference between them, because they're in the same field. So if they use persistent identifiers, we wouldn't need that. But until they do, that's the one thing that doesn't change about people.
That's very true. And of course, a persistent identifier isn't that useful when there's not much information attached to it. It becomes useful as it collects information around it. It's a name and an orchid is no easier to disambiguate than a name or an orchid without a bit of further information relating to their publications, for example. I've spent far more hours than I would like to admit trying to identify closed orchids, which people they belong to. So anything that we can do to start automating these processes is fantastic, though. And just excuse me for a moment, I need to turn my oven down, otherwise my potato's going to burn, and I'll be back in 1 moment.
Well, I was going to say one thing that's sort of improved the situation that Simon was talking about is that a lot of journals now are wanting orchids at the time of publication. And so you find things born connected to orchid profiles. And so I think once the publishing community starts adopting that as a wider practice, then the issue of connecting people to their works becomes easier. I was just talking about born connected journal articles where the publishers ask for the orchid at the time of the manuscript submission.
So Steve, is that a term now, born connected?
I
haven't heard that before, but I love it. Born digital, now born connected, born linked.
There's a very forward-thinking publisher called Pensoft in the community that I work in, and in that case, they publish a lot of organismal taxonomy papers, and so there's a problem with all of these historical papers then of trying to pull the taxonomy out of the papers. And so they now, when people go to publish on their platform, their taxonomies are born as structured data, and they have a whole ontology of all the publishing information. So they're really making an effort to essentially have the data that's a part of the paper be born linked. And I mean, they're really ahead of the curve on that, but if you publish with them, it's just super easy for everything to be linked. And I think that's going to set the standard for other publishers in the future.
I think the way that ORCID develops over the next few years is going to be quite interesting because it's getting mandated by institutions a lot more. And I don't know whether that's going to encourage people to use it or encourage people to have two ORCIDs. I can see that kind of going in different directions because not everyone wants their ORCID to be managed by their institution. So I'm a little bit concerned that that's not a positive development, or even though it is getting more people to have an ORCID. I
think that, so in the biomedical area, one thing that's pushing this in the US is the National Institutes of Health. I'm not sure exactly what the status is, but at least is moving towards requiring ORCIDs on grant proposals. And that's really going to drive things. The other thing is that in the past, institutions actually issued ORCIDs, and that practice is sort of stopped. But you can authorize a third party to write to your ORCID profile. So we have one department at Vanderbilt, the anesthesiology department at Vanderbilt has sort of an organized effort to let their departmental administrators have that kind of third party access. So the people who are not interested in putting in the time to update their records can have a departmental person do it, but it's still their record. Like they have to still take the action of creating the ORCID themselves.
That raises an interesting. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Simon.
No, it's okay. Carry on, Cliff.
I mean, it raises an interesting question to me, which is, if you're a researcher and you're interested in establishing your identity on the web, where are the places that you turn? ORCID certainly is one of them, but I myself haven't loaded all my publications into ORCID. I've got a few representative publications there. And one thing that I think is nice about Wikidata is that because it's community driven and collaborative, people are adding information to my Wikidata item, to the Wikidata item about me, because I don't take ownership of it all the time. So, I'm kind of discovering new things about myself from the community, which is kind of a fascinating experience. And so I think that's one of I haven't experienced vandalism. You could sort of start speculating about the dark side of this, people putting misinformation up or problematic information. But it seems to be at this point less of an issue. It's more just about connecting information about yourself that you didn't know that are in these sort of disparate places. And I find that's, I would think that more researchers would find that kind of enjoyable in a way, like to discover, here is knowledge about myself that someone else holds that I didn't know about.
Yeah, academics can be quite big on maintaining their scholarly profile and doing searches to see what information is out there. And having something like a Wikidata item that they can maintain, but it's also maintained by others, could be really good for that. But there's a flip side that they might really not like all of this information being curated by human editors. Everything else is almost machine curated, so...
Yeah, I mean, I can give you an example. Like one thing, I think a long time ago I signed up for Goodreads, and in an annoying way, like it's still like linked into my Kindle, and so every once in a while when I do reading on Kindle, it shows up on Goodreads, and I mean, I don't even know what's being shown up. What's shown there. I have to go and check. But somehow people are getting my like reading profile, and so suddenly I found that now that's on Wikidata. Like there's an item for your Goodreads identifier, and now people can go find out what I'm reading at night before I go to bed. Mostly Chinese novels, I have to say, these days. But should that I wouldn't put that on a research profile. It's not research; it's just leisure reading. And yet it does have an identifier, and it's a bit of information about me, so it's appropriately there. I didn't remove it. It's just I can imagine other researchers saying, I mean, because Ahava, you kind of mentioned like you get requests to take things down. Doesn't work the same way in the Wikidata world. If there is information and it does have an identifier and it's legitimate, it belongs there.
Which then raises the whole issue of how much of that data belongs to me, and that I should still be allowed to have control over it. And I should be able to say, no, I don't want my Goodreads ID in there. I don't want my gender in there. And even if I could get it down, how do I flag it so that next editor that comes along doesn't add it back in?
We were talking on Monday about data protection laws in Europe and the right to be forgotten, and how that interacts with Wikidata in particular, but the Wikimedia projects more generally. If someone were to make that request, how do we handle it? Because there's information that is in the public domain that we have just copied. We're not the source, but still we're processing information about people, and they have the right to request it's removed.
And we've had issues with that. We recently had an author who several years ago had written a book about having been brought into a cult and sexually abused. And the first edition of the book was written under the author's real name. They started to get hassled in real life. They retracted all the copies, literally found all the copies except for a few that are in libraries, retracted all of those copies, replaced them with copies with the pseudonym. And when the author came to us and asked for the information to be changed in our catalog, we said, but it's in Wikipedia. There's a whole article. It's linked to the entry about you. It's linked. There's an article about the book. And the author worked with Wikipedians to get all that information out of Wikipedia. which is really important because you don't want someone being victimized multiple times because Wikipedia took information that when they took it was perfectly legitimate, but is no longer so.
I think the community will work with people. It's just having the mechanisms to do it and the people to know, oh, does this website, Wikipedia, it's edited by multiple people. I want my information removed and not re-added. How do you deal with that? Where do you go? So, and how do we deal with it when someone makes a request? To process a request and in a timely fashion and remove the information if appropriate. This is obviously potential gaming of that to remove things that we might want to keep. For example, if someone's, I don't know, news stories, for example, that are genuinely newsworthy and have ended up in a Wikipedia article. If there's something like that out there, I don't know whether people can request that to be taken down. So there's all sorts of different ways you can slice and dice a request to remove information about a particular person. So I wonder if anyone else who's listening wants to put any questions in the chat for us to talk about, or indeed, Pad. Got a few minutes left.
Just a brief note. It is about the trend of some institutions to manage the information, the biographic information about their professors and their PhD students, etc., etc. So even in ORCID now, there are some profiles for universities and institutions. So the institution can create an account for it, and after that, it can manage and add ORCID profiles for all its employees, so that things get into orders. Because before, the information in ORCID was quite a mess, and they find that they can no longer continue like this, and this can be kind of managed by third party organization from the universities themselves. And I think this is an advantage for that reason, effectively.
In ORCID profiles, it can become ambiguous, though, when you've got an institution and a researcher managing the same profile. I've seen instances where there's the same employment working for the institution, but the institution is saying that it's got an end date to that employment. The researcher is saying it has a start date, and you've got two different records and they don't match up. And it just it creates bad data if it's not all managed properly. I think it's what's happened is people have just, with the institutional account, have just been writing to ORCIDs without reading what's already there.
Yeah, this can be an editor if the employee or if the professor is in struggle with the administration of his university or institution. So if they are controlling his profile, they can do whatever they want. But on the other side, if we let people write in their profiles as they are, they can write wrong information, they can write something misinformation, they can overstate their position in the university, etc., etc. So there is two sides of a coin here, and I think is kind of a dice. So you have to choose one of two options and see how to get with that issues.
Yeah, this is making me think about a situation in my ORCID profile where I have authorized Figshare to update my profile, and which I probably shouldn't have, because I post just PowerPoints of talks that I've given on Figshare to make them available, and now they're showing up as like on my publications list. So it's actually diluting the real publications with a bunch of, talks that I gave to a few people or something like that. So this is a case of it maybe being too easy to connect and bring that information in. I'm not sure that any of that's ended up in Wikidata, but it doesn't really belong in Wikidata. So that's another potential problem.
I think an interesting problem is when you've got different systems harvesting from each other, the way that any errors just get proliferated through the system without any human intervention to identify them. I think that's a real issue. I know from working with scholarly papers in Wikidata, you quite often find errors that we've just harvested and then no one's looked at the paper to realize that there are problems with it. For example, a DOI doesn't work, which is relatively common, or the DOI is incorrectly formatted in the source and then we've just pulled it in, but there's been no one's clicked on it and checked that it works or made an API call to make sure it's working.
It seems like an area that's ripe for a bot, sort of like the Internet Archive does when it's checking the link integrity for references on English language Wikipedia, right?
Yeah, Vanderbilt dereferences all the ORCIDs before it puts them in. And similarly, I've discovered a lot of data that was put into Wikidata where they only give the initials of the author, and yet the full author names are available like in PubMed. And so again, this is just really laziness on the part of the bot writers, where it'd be very easy for them to make one API call and greatly improve the quality of their data. But it's a dumb bot that just simply writes whatever information it has and does not try to acquire other easily available information. So that's certainly a place where we could have improvement for this problem of proliferation of poor quality information.
Yeah, I think it's a real problem that there is other information that's available to bots and they're not bringing it in, because when a Wikidata item is created, in most cases, it's a long time before anyone goes back to it. It's the point of creation when we've got to add as much information as we can and make it as good quality. So it's not just relying on someone else to come along and then do some work on it. It should be as soon as we've got data about a particular entity, we want it to be good quality. And it's a mindset change, I think.
I think there's probably room to improve the way that errors are flagged on Wikidata. So I know there's the sort of checking that goes on like using a regular expression to check that an ISBN is in the proper format, that kind of thing. And sometimes I struggle with it because I'm like, but it really is an ISBN, and I'm trying to figure out what the regular expression is wanting it to look like. And I feel like in the programming languages world, there's there's been a lot of interesting work on making human-friendly error messages that will pop up and actually help you to diagnose the problem. I mean, and I think there's some of that is in Wikidata, but I think it probably could be extended from our experience working with librarians to help them to understand as a learning experience, if you make this mistake, here's what you ought to do, and here's some resources for trying to solve it. Even a link to a page that kind of covers this issue in more detail. I think there's room for that kind of maybe user interface work.
Yes. As well, there are the work on property constraints here, and there is a work on uses SparkQL to generate consistency rules for Wikidata information, and you can work on that. So
No, I just want to say, I think the community, as you said, have done a fantastic job already. So it's sort of building on success.
Yeah.
And I know you've got a grant for learning pathways to develop those. Is that the sort of thing that would be included in that, the identifying errors and teaching people how to resolve problems?
Yes, very much so. I think one of our first activities, now that we're starting in a few days, will be to kind of map out what those pathways will look like, and it will very much include the kind of common problems that we've experienced people stumbling on. But I'm not sure that we have a good way of quantifying it beyond reflecting on our own experience. So again, this is like a good community feedback question. If there's a way to find the most common errors that are run into, maybe we can do a really like intelligent Sparkle query to find like all the problematic constraints that are set, and focus on those.
You can query constraint violations, but there's also the database reports as well within the properties. So there are a few ways to get to that. I think we're reaching the end now, and I think that's a good note to end on, talking about some forthcoming work, and we've got a lot to look forward to over the next year, I think, with developments in Wikidata and what we're doing outside Wikidata and the interplay between the two. Most important thing to do is to keep on talking and sharing knowledge when we have the opportunity to do so. So I'd like to say thank you to all of the speakers today. We've had some really good presentations, and it's been a great 3 days of WikiCite as well. So
yeah.
hopefully
So I have a brief note just to finish. I think that there should be some work in the future about which type of data should be included about bibliographic information. For example, there are plenty of items that have DOI, but all these items deserve to be included in Wikidata? Because I have some presentations with DOIs and they have been included, and something like this, and just brief notes or something like that. And I think this will overwhelm all the stuff. So I think that should be kind of organizations and kind of writing some wideness for developing this work on structured bibliographic data.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work to do and a lot of conversations that we need to have about many different areas. So we're going to have plenty to keep us busy. Yeah. So we are right at the end now. So say thank you again, and
Thank you.
it's been a pleasure to host, which I wasn't expecting at all. So there we go.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you for doing it. It was a pleasure.
No, it was great.
Nice to meet you all.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Thank
much
you, everyone.
for your time.
Thank you. Bye.
See you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.